Good afternoon, everyone. It is Monday, March the 1st, 2021. It is currently 1:32 p.m. Central Time, and I'm here at Victory Baptist Church, and you and I are about to, engage in probably what will be considered a very controversial conversation, a very controversial discussion. And it's sad that that's how this is going to be viewed, as controversial, and that, look, he said this and he should have said this. I ask that you try to listen and you put on your thinking caps, and we try to consider this subject that we're going to be talking today, as carefully as you can, because I think there's a lot of things we need to discuss and a lot of things we need to consider. We're going to be listening to an audio clip that comes from a university campus where there was a conversation about what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to listen to that. We're going to break that down. We're going to be reading from some different articles. We got a lot of things to do, but before we can do any of that, if you've been with us recently, you know we've been experiencing some technical difficulties. So before I spend an hour in this live broadcast, only to discover that the audio was messed up, I have to take just a second to test the audio to make sure everything is good to go. I apologize. I know this is not professional, but trust me, if you spent all the time doing something like this only to find out that it wasn't working, it would be very upset. It would be very frustrating to you. Give me 1 second. I'm listening to us live. It always starts with our there. Here we go. I'm going to hear myself talking. All the time doing something like this only to find out that it wasn't working. There we go. All right. So we seem to be live on the air. You're good. All right. Thank you very much. All right. I love when someone's listening to me live and they give me that update. They give me that information. Thank you. We're good. We're going to jump in. We have a lot to talk about, all right? And we've got to set this up, okay? We all know this is just an absolute fact of history. Society is always changing. Society is always changing. Their morality is always changing. The dominant philosophy is always changing. Their perspective on ethics, their perspective on sex, their perspective on everything is always changing. The culture is forever changing, and that will always be the case. What is dogmatic within society today will not be dogmatic within that society 20, 30 years later. There's always a fluctuation. There's always a change. And in the midst of all of that change, in the midst of all of that constant up and down and around, the church is supposed to be standing there, and we're supposed to be fixed, unmovable, because we are holding on to the Word of God. Our understanding, our philosophy, our understanding of human beings, it comes from Scripture. Our understanding of creation comes from Scripture. Our understanding of morality comes from Scripture. Our understanding of sin and eternal life is supposed to come from Scripture. So when you have and I'm just going to refer to it as the church in general, Christians holding to Scripture, not being moved, not supposed to be changing, while at the same time existing in a culture that is forever changing, clearly, not only are you going to find yourselves in conflict with one another, you are also going to find yourself, listen to me carefully, you're going to also find yourself having great difficulty in communicating with one another. Right? Because you're speaking one way and they're like, wait, what are you talking about? Nobody thinks that way. Wait, what are you talking about? That was so 100 years ago. Nobody looks at it that way. And then not only do they get upset, they believe you're outdated, they believe you're irrelevant. And then sometimes what the church does is like, we don't want people to think that we're outdated, that we're irrelevant. So then the church tries to change to accommodate the changing culture, but that is not only is it against Scripture, it's just foolish, because whatever you change today, you'll have to change again tomorrow, because the world is always changing. But because the world is changing, and because this can create difficulty in how we communicate with the culture, at times the church has to stop and go, wait a minute. What is happening out there? I'm sitting inside a church building right now. What is happening outside the door of this church? What's happening outside on the other side of that window that I'm looking through? What is going on out there? And how can I communicate with them so they at least understand what I'm saying? because sometimes you'll hear Christians trying to, in a sense, engage the culture, communicate with the culture, and it doesn't appear that no one's listening to each other. Everyone's just talking past one another. So there's no real communication is occurring. Or Christians decide to weigh, sometimes the Christians, instead of engaging in a conversation, in a discussion, or in a proclamation of truth in a way that could be beneficial, we decide to engage in methods that are not only not beneficial, they actually keep people from hearing the truth they need to hear. There's times, and we neglect the gospel, we neglect the Great Commission to engage in fights about this difference in the way they view things and the way we view things. In other words, we seem sometimes more interested. Let's see if I can state it this way. Sometimes the church seems more interested in getting the world simply to think like we do, to acknowledge that we're right about issues without them coming to the gospel. In other words, we just want you to think the way we think about sexuality. We want you to think the way we think about morality. We want you to think the way we think about creation. And we so focus on arguing about that we neglect to give them what they really need, which is the gospel. They need to hear that there is a God, he is holy, that he has a set standard of morality. We don't meet that morality. We will never meet that morality. Therefore, we are condemned. But God, because he loves us, sent his only son, the second person of the Trinity, the eternal Son of God, to come to keep that morality God demands and die for our failure. And then by faith, his righteousness is imputed to our account and our sins are forgiven and we can have a right relationship with him. Instead of focusing on communicating that, we just want them, no, you need to think the way we think about sexuality. You need to think the way we think about creation. You need to think the way we think about marriage. Well, you can try to win that argument, but even if you win that argument, even if they agree with you, the Christian worldview says without salvation, they're going to die and spend an eternity separated from God. So is it more important for us to win an argument or to present the gospel? And it's so easy to get distracted from that. It's happened to me. It's happened to you. I was in the military. I worked with people from every conceivable background on the face of the earth. I worked with people who were Jehovah's Witnesses. I worked with people who were Satanists. I worked with people who were atheist agnostics. I worked with people who were Muslim. I worked with people from all different races, from all different parts of the country. And we would sometimes have all kinds of very, 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 very interesting conversation, because if you ever worked with me, you know that I love to have conversations about important things. I do not like mundane conversations. I like to talk about deep things. But what I realized is that at times, if I'm not careful, I just want to win a debate, not present the gospel. Even if I won the debate, what am I accomplishing? And I want you to keep that kind of idea in mind when it comes to the subject, are you ready? Of sex, gender, transgender, what is sometimes referred to as misgendering someone. This whole subject, that's such a hot topic that can get people thrown off social media, can get your book pulled from Amazon. Even trying to discuss it right now, people start yelling and people will silence you. You have a hard time even communicating it. The church needs to stop and go, how should we approach this? How should we think about this? So what I want to do first is establish the dramatic change that is going on right here in America. Now, you may be listening in another country. You can speak more specific to what is happening in your country. But here in the United States, there is no question a dramatic change is occurring in how people understand sex and gender. There is a dramatic change. You don't believe me? Just get on Google and just put in, is there a difference between sex and gender? And you're going to get 9,000 articles from all kinds of medical organizations, all kinds of medical groups, all kinds of things telling you that there is, they will give you their perspective. We're going to read one of the articles. I don't want to give it away, but I just want you to realize that when you look at that, you're going to be like, wow, that's very different than the way I understood it in the way, like, first you have the generational difference, right? Well, that's not the way we understood it when I was a teenager in 1980 or 1970 or whatever year you went to high school. We didn't learn it that way. So you got the generational difference, and then you've got obviously, I'll call it a theological difference. Well, wait a minute. The Bible seems to indicate that God created us male and female. So So there's a generational difference and there's a theological difference, but it is changing. It is changing. Let me give you an example. I'll give you an example, all right? Let me, I just got to open up my iPad because it locked while I was talking, because my intros are always 12 hours long. For example, I just did a Google search. Are sex and gender the same? All right. And I've got like 749, is that 1,000? I think 749,000 results. So all kinds of articles, right? And the very first thing that pops up, sex and gender are often used interchangeably despite having different meanings. Sex refers to a set of biological attributes in humans and animals. Gender refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of girls, women, boys, men, and gender diverse people. So they're saying sex and gender, not the same thing. Not the same thing. Now, you know how this conversation goes, right? So your sex is determined by your biology. That's what you are, right? Okay, so you're a male or a female. That may be your sex biologically, but that may not be your gender. Your gender can be how you choose to identify yourself. Not because society says, well, because you're a boy, you have to do A, B, C, D, E, and you have to look like this and dress like this. No. Gender is fluid. It's not fixed. It's not binary. It's non-binary. And we don't know how many genders there are. And it could be an undisclosed number. And so if someone identifies different, in other words, their gender is different than their sex, you have to go along with it. In other words, they say, look, biologically I'm a male, but I don't identify as a male. I identify as a female, or whatever gender they identify themselves as. Then the argument is you have to go along with it. And if you don't, you're misgendering them, which some will say is an act of violence, that it's basically a hate crime. It's hate speech. And you should be silenced. That should be the end of you. Well, that is a dramatic change. So how do we approach this? We can try to argue. I'll give you a medical article. All right. Here's a medical article. And I used to be in charge of the medical library at the hospital I worked at. It was my job to make sure they had the latest medical journals and latest medical information. And I would review the information and then make sure I would go, okay, this doctor, because of his specialty, he needs this. And so I was there to make sure all this information. I was always looking at medical journals and medical information. This one goes back a few years, but just consider this. Sex and gender. What is the difference? Historically, the terms sex and gender have been used interchangeably, but their uses are becoming increasingly distinct, and it is important to understand the difference between the two. Now, I'm not asking you to agree with anything being said. I just want you to hear this. We got to listen. See, if you just run over and say, hey, the Bible says God created them male and female, I don't care what you say. Well, you're speaking one language. They're speaking another language. You're going to say, follow the science. They're going to argue they are following the science. And guess what? We're never going to get anywhere. So we got to stop and think about, like, how do we address this? How do we communicate to people about this subject so that that something beneficial can come from it? So let me continue with this article. This is the way it starts. It says, first they give you that paragraph. Historically, the terms sex and gender have been used interchangeably, but their uses are becoming increasingly distinct, and it is important to understand the difference between the two. This article will look at the meaning of sex and the difference between the sexes. It will also look at the meaning of gender and the concepts of gender roles, gender identity, and gender expression. In general terms, sex refers to the biological differences between males and females. And you can go into those differences, obviously, from the anatomy. We could go to, the genetic makeup. We could go through those differences, and they list some of those differences. But you get the idea, all right? I don't have to get too graphic. You get the idea, all right? Gender is more difficult to define, but it can refer to the role of a male or female in society, known as a gender role, or an individual's concept of themselves or gender identity. Now, yes, when we talk about gender roles or how a gender is to be viewed, sometimes, now listen to what I'm about to say. You've got to hear everything I'm going to say, because people are going to rip things I'm going to say out of context and go crazy. I will argue that there have been some harmful things done because some people's being so dogmatic that, hey, you're a boy, this is what you have to do. And if you don't do that, there's something wrong with you. I think this has led some boys to maybe some kind of crisis with them trying to identify themselves, because you have to do certain things. For example, if you're a boy, you need to go play in the dirt. You like trucks. There's certain things you have to do. And if you don't like those kinds of things, then and this is how it definitely worked when I was young. Well, you'd be called a homosexual, because I was one of those guys. I played sports, but guess what I did? I didn't like going outside. I definitely didn't like to hunt. Camping, give me a break. Why would I go sleep outside when human civilization has worked so hard to perfect inside? No, I don't want to go outside. So I didn't like, if I took I still do it, 2-3 showers a day. I don't like to be dirty. Work on a car? Are you out of your mind? Why do I want to go work on a car? A car? I viewed a car as simply a tool to get me from point A to point B. I didn't care what it looked like. I couldn't identify the car. If a crime occurred and a cop pulled me, said, hey, you were a witness to the crime. Yeah. Did you see him drive off? Yes, I did. What kind of car? Red? What kind of car? I don't know. Red? You don't know the make, model? What do you mean make or model? I don't even, whenever I have to call the car dealership to schedule an appointment, they're like, what kind of car do you have? A Toyota? They're like, what kind? A Toyota Silver? Okay, it's a silver Toyota? Well, sir, we need to know what kind. And I'm like, hey, I yell at my wife. Hey, what kind of car do we have? Oh, it's a Corolla. Okay, do we know what year? Because I don't know anything. You can open the hood of a car and there'll be a bunch of guys standing around looking at it going, yeah, and whatever they're saying. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I could care less. Someone gets a new car and everyone goes out to look at the new car. I don't care to look at the new car because I don't care. Does that make me not a guy? Does that make me not masculine? Does that call in my sexuality into question? So sometimes the forcing of like, hey, you're a boy. This is the way you have to like sports. You have to do this. I think that was damaging. And I think it did raise some like, well, I'm not like other boys. So that must mean I'm gay. No, it doesn't mean that. It just means you're an individual. You don't have to like what everyone else likes. You don't have to do what everyone else does. Who came up with those ideas, I think is just ridiculous. I just think it's foolish. Well, I'm a girl and I like to work on cars, or well, that doesn't mean you're a lesbian. It just means you're different. You have different likes. So sometimes these gender things, I think, have been harmful. That, hey, if you're a boy, this is the way you're supposed to. No, why? You have to like it you have to like things this way and do things this way. And I think we've got to allow human beings are very unique people. Every person is unique. Different taste, different likes, and you should just be able to pursue those. And why does you have to assign, well, you're not doing what's right with your gender. I think that's harmful, and you're trying to force people into a thing. So I do understand how gender roles have a certain society, like society will say this is what boys in our society must do, and they're just kind of arbitrarily assigned. And I think that there can be some damage there. I do understand that. Now, I think some people have taken that and then gone to, well, crazy ideas. Well, that may, hey, look, you're a boy and you don't like this. Well, maybe you're really not a boy. Maybe you're a different gender. Now biologically you're a boy, but maybe you're not really a boy. That's going to the other extreme. One would be like, hey, you don't do this. you've got to be gay. You got to be gay because you don't act like the rest of the boys. That's damaging. The other side comes along and goes, oh, it's okay. It's okay. Don't let them do that to you. Don't. You know what? You may not. You may be a boy biologically, but maybe you identify as something else. So you should just start identifying as something else. That, to me, is just as damaging. Both are damaging, and we have to realize that we've got to think about these things in maybe a more careful way. But all right, so they go on to say that gender, again, is and their argument here that it's more difficult to define, and that it can deal with concepts of gender roles, gender identity, and gender expression. And general terms, sex refers to biological differences between males and females. Gender is more difficult to define, but it can refer to the role of a male or female in society, known as a gender role, or an individual's concept of themselves or gender identity. Sometimes a person's genetically assigned sex, now listen now, this is where we are as a culture. You just have to understand, I am not arguing, I've got to keep repeating myself because people are, you're making an argument. I'm not making an argument for anything. We have to figure out where the society is and then how do we communicate to it? Because we're getting ready to listen to a conversation between two people who have very different views on this. And I will argue by the time the conversation was over, it was a waste of time. They just went in circles. It went in circles. And that's what we have to avoid. All right. So let's go through this. All right. Sometimes a person's genetically assigned sex does not line up with their gender. These individuals might refer to themselves as transgender, non-binary, or gender non-conforming. All right. Now, this is where society is going. Hey, you don't feel like you're a guy, even though biologically you are, your sex is male. Well, you don't identify as that. Well, guess what? You don't have to. You can identify as a female. You can identify as gender nonconformist, non-binary. You can identify whatever you want. And then the rest of society, has to go along with the way you do. And if we don't, we're misgendering, we're hating you, we're committing an act of violence against you, and we're horrible, bigoted people. Basically, we're in line with the racist of the past who treated people of different races in an incorrect way. Basically, that's what it's connected to. And so, how do you communicate with a person like that? How do you communicate? You can say all day, well, God created a male or female. There's only two. You can say there's only two genders, and then they're going to pull up 900 medical articles, like I've got right here in this medical journal, saying no, not the case. Sex. They're male and female sex. Gender is how one identifies. It's how society tries to identify it. And it's non-binary. And you can identify all kinds of different ways. That's how it's going to go. So as Christians, if we say no, two genders, they're going to say we're not scientific. Even though we may try to tell them to follow the science, they're going to pull up all these articles telling us that we need to follow the science. So then it's going to be, whose science do you believe? So now guess what happens? There you are arguing with them. They're arguing with you. You pull up your article. They pull up their article. You give your argument. They give their argument. And you go into one big, never-ending circle. What did we accomplish? Is that how we address it? Should we as Christians try to fight this at that level? Look, you're a boy. But I don't identify. I don't care. You're a boy. There's something wrong with you. All right. Let's say you convince them. Okay, you're right. I'm a boy. What was the ultimate? What did you win anything there? Did you get a prize? Did you get the championship trophy for debate? You see how if we're not careful, it will distract us from what our commission is. Now, I'm not saying we don't address this. I'm just saying that I don't know. Put it this way. I'm going to throw it out there that this is the problem we are facing. Society is moving so far away from we'll call it the traditional view. Now, I know what you'll hear. Well, it's the traditional view in our society, but other society, it's never been the traditional view. But again, even there, you're going to argue and argue and argue. But how do we address a culture that this is the way they're thinking? These are the medical articles they're going to pull up. They go on to say, The difference between male and female sexes are physiological, anatomical and physiological. Sex tends to relate to biological differences. So in other words, the difference between a male and female sexes deals with the biological differences. I'll just put it that way. For instance, male and female, we could get into their body parts. They go through that. We're not going to do that there. We could talk about the levels and types of hormones present in the male and female bodies are different. They're different hormones, different levels, obviously. Genetic factors define the sex of an individual. Women have 46 chromosomes, including 2 X's, and men have 46, including Y and X and a Y. The Y chromosome is dominant and carries the signal for the embryo to begin, developing, right? And we can get into all of that. Both men and women have testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. However, women have higher levels of estrogen and progesterone, and men have higher levels of testosterone. All right, we know this. These are some of the major differences. The male-female split is often seen as binary, and then we'll get in some situations where things can happen. For example, the male and female split is often seen as binary, but this is not entirely true. For instance, some men are born with 2 or 3 X chromosomes, just as some women are born with a Y chromosome. In some cases, a child is born with a mix between female and male genitalia. They are sometimes termed intersex, and the parents may decide which gender to assign to the child. Intersex individuals account for around 1 in 1,500 births. Some people believe that sex should be considered a continuum rather than 2 mutually exclusive categories. All right, now, we'll stop right there. Now, look, we have to acknowledge this. As Christians, this is pretty straightforward from our Christian worldview. We live in a fallen world. And because we live in a fallen world, we have bodies that are subject to disease, mutations, and a lot of things. Birth defects of all kind can occur. So you do have these situations where people are born with these genetic things going on, born with these different things happening, and there's no question about it. Those are difficult situations. The parents have to decide what to do. Very difficult situations, and we always need to show compassion there. That's got to be difficult. How to make these decisions? Are you going to make the right decision? Do you wait? What do you do? I mean, those are crazy situations. We cannot deny that those situations exist. To act like that they don't exist is just crazy. We live in a fallen world, and people can be born with all kinds of different things that are not the normal way it happens. We can all acknowledge that. We should never play that down, mock it, minimize it. We should be there to be compassionate and understanding for the people in those situations. But those situations are obviously not the norm, and we can't allow those situations that are not the norm to define the norm. I think we can all agree with that. But we have to be willing to have some ability to address these issues and address them in a compassionate way and be, have some decency in how we try to deal with those situations. But we understand, basically, that's how it works. Genetically, physiologically, our bodies, there's a difference. There's a difference between a male and a female. This is a genetic difference. It goes through we know that there's a difference. There's no way to get around that. Sex, there's a male and a female. That's the way it typically works. There's no way to get around that. We understand that. But the problem is the world is out there going, but gender is something completely different. And if someone identifies in a way not consistent with their biological sex, that's okay, and it should be accepted, and we must go along with it. And not to go along with it is basically a crime. That is where we're going. How do we have that conversation with these individuals in a meaningful way? Now, if you want, you can just get out there and call people names and be hateful and be evil and mean, and because you're going to prove look, you can go after this situation where you're more concerned with proving a point than you are with ministering to human beings created in the image of God. Sometimes what we want to do is win an argument, win a debate, call someone a name, be rude. That's not beneficial. I remember plenty of times hearing sermons where the pastor would stand behind the pulpit and make fun of homosexuals, do the little like limp wrist kind of thing, talk in a certain way. And it's like, and you hear that and you're like, that's from the pulpit. What are you accomplishing? Are you preaching the gospel? Are you simply preaching hate and mocking and mimicking and hurting people simply to make a point? That's not godly. That's not godly. Now, I got no problem saying that lifestyle is a sin. We can preach that from the pulpit. And at the same time, we can preach, hey, if you're going to preach at the homosexuals, preach to all the young people in your church engaged in premarital sex. Preach to all the men in the church who are looking at pornography. Let's be fair here. Let's not just single that sin out. Let's call out all the sin of gluttony. Let's call out the sin of gossip and backbiting and slander. Let's be consistent. Let's be consistent. But sometimes I think we want to make a point more than we actually want to minister to people. Do we want to minister to people who are transgender? This is the question. What do you want to do? Do you want to minister to people who are transgender, right? Or do you want to simply make a point and win a debate? Do you see them as human beings who need the gospel, human beings that you want to minister to and show love to, or do you just see them as a group of people that is your enemy and you want to prove them wrong? Now, there's a balance here. Doesn't mean we compromise. Doesn't mean we change biblical teaching. I'm just saying that we have to figure out what we're trying to do, because sometimes we can say we're trying to minister and we're trying to preach, but it comes across far more like we're trying to win a debate and make a point. There's no value in that. That's not going to accomplish anything other than never-ending arguments where you're like, see, look, I got this article. And they're like, look, I got this article. And you quote this professor. And they're, well, I can quote this professor. And you quote this doctor. And they quote this doctor. And you just go around and around and around and around and around and around and around. And nothing happens but noise. And guess what isn't happening in the midst of all of that noise? Ministering to people, calling people to faith, pointing out their sin. Look, that person who's transgender or who considers themselves non-binary or gender non-conformist or whatever title, whatever pronoun they want to give themselves, guess what? Their issue, even if you fix that perspective, guess what they are? They are a sinner who still needs Christ. Their sin goes beyond whatever your view is on transgenderism. Their sin is deeper than that. They're guilty in Adam, and they're a sinner way before they got to that subject or way before they got to that issue. So sometimes we just want to focus on one issue, but the reality is sin in general, and they need faith in Jesus Christ. That's what they need first and foremost. They need salvation. And then, yes, there's a lot of issues to unpack. There's a lot of issues to address. And I'm not saying that we never address them. I'm just saying that we've got to think about what we're trying to do. Minister or win a debate, right? This article continues, right? I want to get to the audio clip. Gender tends to denote the social and cultural roles of each sex within a given society. Rather than being purely assigned by genetics, as sex differences generally are, people often develop their gender roles in response to their environment, including family interactions, the media, peers, and education. Now, I think this is interesting because I don't know if they intended to do this, but I think it's fascinating. If all of these other things kind of begin to determine how you view your gender, go through all of these things, environment, family, media, peers, education, then you're telling me that there is it seems like I don't know if they intended this, but to me, from reading this almost gives me the idea that there could be someone out there that based off external forces, they could be led to go, I don't know if I'm a boy or if I'm a girl. That external forces could lead people to gender confusion. Has nothing to do with something coming from inside of them. It's something coming from outside of them, calling them to question their identity. Now, I don't know if they intended that. If that's the case, then wait a minute. The last thing anyone should want to do is to put any force on anyone, causing them confusion about, okay, I know I was born a male, but my gender identity, I don't think I'm identifying as a male because all these people are saying that I don't have to be, or maybe I'm not that. If all of these other forces are doing that, then could we not agree that we could create an environment where we do more damage than good by creating confusion in people's minds where they got to figure out, now, of all the other things they got to figure out in life, now they have to figure out, am I really a boy or am I really a girl? Like we wouldn't want to put any external forces on people to create any kind of confusion because there's enough things in life to figure out. Who am I? Where am I going? What am I going to do in life? What is right? What is wrong? You got enough to figure out. Go to any high school and it's filled with 300, 400, 700 kids, 20 kids, depending on the size of the school, who still don't know who they are. They're still trying to figure out, and they're confused and they're insecure, and they cover up all of that insecurity and their actions and their words and the way they try to disrespect authority. All of it is covering up a whole bunch of insecurity and confusion about life. But they cover it up with a very good outside face that tries to act like I don't care and I don't like you and don't talk to me, but it's all covering up a whole bunch of insecurities. This seems to acknowledge that gender can be influenced by all of that your identification can be influenced by these outside sources. Why would we want any of those outside sources confusing people about it? Shouldn't the general operating, to me, the general consensus should be that you would think, generally speaking, your gender will be consistent with your sex. Normally speaking, we would say that is normally the way it works. Clearly, the majority, that's how it works. So when someone doesn't identify that, why do they not identify? I think it's perfectly okay to ask that question. Why? Why do you not identify that way? Now, usually the answer is, I never felt like that way forever. And you can't ultimately convince someone of this. So that's why I think sometimes even having this argument is foolish. But that individual needs to figure out why. They can tell themselves, well, I never felt this way. But if you really look at it, it's because of some external source. Or sadly, it could be because of some horrible tragedy done upon them. Some kind of sexual abuse or something happened tragic in their life. Not saying that's always the case. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that this article at least acknowledges there's a lot of forces that could impact this. Well, then that tells me if an outside source, an outside force keeps whispering in my ear that, let's say, you're not a human, you're not a human, you're actually a dog. Now, I know that people are going to accuse me of being ridiculous, but just stay with me. And then I start thinking, you know what, maybe I'm actually a dog. I do a lot of things. I really like dogs and I feel more comfortable with dogs. Maybe I'm really a dog. I think most people say, hey, that's somebody, your thinking is being changed by an outside force. This is dangerous. Would it not apply to someone being confused about what gender because of an outside influence? This article, and again, this is not from I'm reading from a medical article. They seem to give credence to that idea. Let me read it to you again. Gender tends to denote the social and cultural role of each sex within a given society, rather than being purely assigned by genetics as sex differences generally are. People are often develop their gender roles in response to their environment, family interaction, media, peers, and education. This is making an argument that your gender identity is coming from something outside of yourself. In fact, they even use the word generally. Generally, this is where your gender is determined by an out. Does that not? To me, that should raise a flag. The World Health Organization identifies gender in the following way, and you need to know this because this is what the world will throw at you if you try to have this discussion. Gender refers to the socially constructed characteristics of women and men, such as norms, roles, and relationships of and between groups of women and men. It varies from society to society and, you ready? Can be changed. Now, that's where the world is going. You may not like it. You may hate it. You may want to mock it. You may want to stand against it, but that's where the world is going. Now, how can I, as a Christian, communicate the gospel to a world that's doing that? The first thing I need to communicate, let's just make this obvious. This shouldn't even be a trick question. My first thing I need to communicate with them is there is a God. He is holy. You are a sinner. You're guilty in Adam. You're guilty in the things you do and the things you don't do. Your guilt goes way beyond your sexuality, whether you're LGBTQ, no matter what gender. None of that has anything to do with this issue. You are a sinner well beyond that. By your very nature, by your very thoughts. You are a sinner. You need to repent and you need faith in Jesus Christ. That's the message we just cannot compromise on. We have to get that message out there. Once a person becomes a Christian, right, puts their faith in Christ, then obviously we want to address all of these issues. All of these issues. Not just gender identity, but all sexuality, morality, marriage, raising children. There's so many issues now. That's how the Great Commission is. Go teach, that's evangelism, baptize, bring into the church. And then that next teaching is the discipling part where you're addressing all of these issues where they're trying to figure out, how do I live out my Christian life now? And if you got someone there who's like, I don't know what to do here, I'm confused here, then we need compassionate help and trying to figure this out. But I think just going out there and trying to win the argument with society, we're not going to win the argument. I'm just telling you, you're not going to win the argument. Because the whole world, even the World Health Organization, everyone's moving away from our traditional way of identifying that sex equals gender. You're born male or female, that's your sex, that's your gender. End of discussion. The world is rejecting that at an alarming rate. From medical, education, now there are still those who will fight against this, but I'm just saying, and I completely agree that I can look at a person and go, well, now let's make it clear, genetically you're male or female. But if you've ever had this conversation with someone, they'll look at you like, who cares? You can tell me how many, I've got these chromosomes, you've got those chromosomes genetically. I've got these hormones, you've got these hormones. Okay, whatever. My identity is different from that. So I think sometimes we even engage in an argument and we think we're making a point, and we're not making a point. They're looking at us like, what are you talking? We're making a completely different argument. And they're like, okay, and they will tell you, speak to a young person about this who's going this direction. They'll tell you are confusing. They'll say this all the time. You are confusing sex with gender. Sex and gender are two different things. Sex is biology. It's physiology. It's your body. It's genetic. Gender is how you identify, and you can identify with something not consistent with your sex. Now, I will argue, and I think obviously we would agree that you have to realize just how sad and crazy that is, because you don't identify with your sex, and then you go spend all of this money and effort to literally stop your body from producing the things it's supposed to produce, using surgical procedures to completely force your body to look in a way that is not consistent with the sex it was born as. You should think that the society would go, that just seems crazy, but that's where we are. That's where we are. So we've got to have a better look. Think of it this way. The church thought the way they were going to fight, and you know this, the church's, at times, great intellects decided to fight homosexuality by saying, God did not create Adam and Steve, he created Adam and Eve. And whoa, what a great argument, man. God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. That's going to stop homosexuality. It didn't stop it. It didn't stop it. Sounds good. You say it from the pulpit, everybody says amen, and everyone chuckles and everyone laughs and everyone thinks you're great and you're a wonderful preacher. But are we actually addressing the society that we live in any meaningful way? We've got to figure out how we're going to communicate with a society that's saying, look, you're arguing about a biblical teaching on sex, and we're arguing that gender has nothing to do with God did create them male and female. That's their sex. Their gender has nothing to do with that. And we've got to be able to go, how do we address this in a meaningful way? Now, I will argue, okay, if you don't believe gender is with the same as sex, then why do you have to go through all of these unnatural things to try to make your body now agree with the way you identify? I mean, you're literally removing parts of your body, and I mean, you're doing some crazy, horrific things to your body. Doesn't that call into question that you're trying to do something that clearly doesn't agree with the way you were born? I mean, so the question should be, why don't you identify that way? What caused that? What's going on? Why is that happening? But this is what's going on. So here's what we're going to do. We'll use the last segment, and I wish I could go on because I could continue reading this article here, but you can just look them up. There's, like I said, 79,000 articles pulled up just in seconds, and you're going to find and try to read. And here's what I would tell you to do: read articles that are coming from like medical journals, the World Health Organization, and you're like, I don't agree with them. I understand that. I want you to read them. And the reason I want you to read those articles is because that's the literature the kid on the college campus is going to quote. That's the literature that the college professor is going to quote. That's the literature that when you're trying to argue this with someone, they're going to quote that. So if you're just reading articles from a Christian website who says that's not true, that's not true, that's not true, well, you've got to know exactly how they're arguing because we got to know how to address it. All right? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to listen to Steven Crowder. He does this thing called Change My Mind. He goes on a college campus. He gets permission. He sets up a table with a banner that says, it'll be some kind of, like, there's only two genders. Change my mind. Something along along those lines. And then he invites college students to sit down with him and engage in dialogue and a conversation. Now, I don't always agree with everything Steven Crowder stands for, but I love what he's attempting to do. He's trying to get people from a completely different perspective to sit down and actually have a conversation. He doesn't really engage in gotcha tactics. He doesn't really try to set them up. He tries to really let them speak. He speaks. Sometimes it's hostile, but he tries to keep it calm, to have a dialogue. And I think we need more dialogue in society. Now, I'm not saying he's coming at things from a Christian perspective. He's obviously coming at things from a more right-leaning conservative perspective, but I still appreciate go there to the college kids and have dialogue. As Christians, we can learn about having dialogue with people. Now, yes, we still look, there's no room for dialogue about what the scriptures teach other than proclaiming it. But we can have dialogue about how they feel about it and have dialogue about their perspective and try to understand where they're coming from. And we got to just realize the culture is changing, and we've got to be able to try to speak to that culture in a meaningful way. But we're going to listen to this. I'm going to interrupt it here and there, but I just want you to hear this conversation. Basically, he was on a college campus basically asking, is misgendering someone? Misgendering someone is not a hate crime, or misgendering someone is not hate speech. Change my mind. And he's talking to, I believe, a female here that is, while arguing basically that Steven Crowder doesn't understand, the difference between sex and gender. He doesn't understand how harmful misgendering can be, and that there's not just two genders, that gender is not binary. Basically, a lot of the things we just talked about. But I want you to hear this conversation for this reason. As you're listening, I want you to ask yourself, is this conversation meaningful? Is anyone actually listening to the other person? Because I think a lot of us has found ourselves in these same kind of conversations, and I don't know if we were helpful, and I don't know if we handled it in a biblical, godly way. Right? So let's listen to this, and you can give me your feedback at any time. If you're listening to me live, you can give me your feedback at any time. Here we go. Is misgendering violence? But the ramifications of saying that we have to acknowledge somebody legally who identifies as a bobcat, you understand, would be insurmountable. The ramifications would be all sorts of new legal identifications that would be required, which don't currently exist. As a gender? Why the conversation? I would love it if you want to sit down afterward, and I would love to sit down and have continue this conversation. I would. Well, are you? Thank you, Thomas. Are you done? Yeah. I appreciate it, Thomas. Thank you.
I'm Madison. I'm co-president of Spectrum, the LGBT organization on campus.
Great.
Love to talk.
Okay. Now, that started abruptly. I apologize. There was a bunch of people trying to talk to him. He's sitting at the table trying to talk to them. And then finally, this Madison, she's part of the LGBTQ group on campus, and she wants to sit down and talk to them. I reduced the volume a little bit because I know that was a little loud, so I apologize. I wasn't quite ready to hit play, and I accidentally pushed play, and it started. So I'm going to back that up just a little bit so this will all flow together. Just remember, he's basically having conversations. All these people have gathered around his table. They are all trying to, because what a lot of times happens is people want to engage him like while they're standing in the group, because then they tend to be more bold and more hostile. And so he tries to always stop that, to say, no, come sit down. And some people won't come and sit down. They don't want to be put on the spot. But when they're in a group, then it gives them that sense of, yeah, you're wrong. Yeah, and just throw anything out. And I love the fact that he's like, no, sit down and talk. Let's talk. And we need more of that just everywhere. Discussion, understanding. And the church is going to have to think about how we're going to address many of these issues. So I'm going to back this up. I reduced the volume about 10%. Here we go. Remember, you're just going to hear the conversation, and then it's going to, I think the girl's name is Madison. She's the one who's going to take up the whole conversation. But we'll get through this. I just want you to get an idea of what's going on. I apologize of such an abrupt transition there, but here we go.
But the ramifications of saying that we have to acknowledge somebody legally who identifies as a bobcat, you understand, would be
What are the ramifications?
Insurmountable. The ramifications would be all sorts of new legal identifications that would be required, which don't currently exist.
As a gender?
Well, the conversation. I would love it if you want to sit down afterward, and I would love to sit down and have continue this conversation. I would. Well, are you? Thank you, Thomas. Are you done?
Yeah.
I appreciate it, Thomas. Thank you.
I'm Madison. I'm co-president of Spectrum, the LGBT organization on campus.
Great.
Love to talk to you about this.
Great. Thank you, Madison.
So, what are
My name's Steven.
Okay.
I appreciate it. You sitting down. And what is it that you disagree with?
So I think you're confused on the idea of gender versus sex.
I'm confused. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So when we say there are only two genders, we often confuse the idea of gender and sex.
Sure.
Sex is a generalization of XY chromosomes. So we assume that, or XY, XX, combination of chromosomes. So we assume that male and female comes from your chromosomes, right? But that's really just the idea that there's only two possibilities of sex, right? So even within sex itself, you can be born intersex, which means that you're born with sexual characteristics of both what we would consider male and female. And then you have gender, and gender is more about a mental state based off of societal norms. So within our Western society, we often discuss gender as being binary, meaning that there's two options.
Sure.
So boy, girl, man, woman. However, in other societies, non-Western societies, there are more than two options.
Okay, can I ask you a couple of questions there to unpack? Appreciate you taking the time, by the way. So what was your name?
Madison.
Madison. So let's go to the sex concept before gender, I think, because the idea of gender being different from sex is predicated on the idea that sex is binary. That's where you mentioned that term, gender binary. So you mentioned intersex. Okay, I'm aware of intersex. Now, of course, intersex doesn't necessarily mean that someone is completely between sexes. Usually they have very identifiable characteristics, like a very large clitoris or micro penis. In that case, it also affects 0.08. People think this is funny. It's just true. Less than 0.08% of population Earth.
But they still exist.
Let me ask you this. In human anatomy class, how many fingers are you taught human beings have?
We're told typically that people have 10. However, there are people born with 11
But you're
fingers.
taught 10, right?
Yeah.
So we don't teach people there are people born with 11 fingers. There are people born with 12 fingers.
Yeah, but we don't completely dismiss that those people exist just because that they're uncommon, do we?
We teach that human beings have 10 fingers. I would wager that everyone here has been taught, human beings have 10 fingers. Of course, there are anomalies. That's the same way that we treat intersex, or these, as you said, you mentioned chromosomes, genetic abnormalities that are a very extreme case. So I think what we need to do is remove this extreme case with sex, just as we would with how many fingers, toes, how many kidneys you have, how many feet you have. There's something that's typical, there's something that's atypical. Then you go to gender. This is where, listen, I'm open. Everyone has said sex is different from gender, and gender is not non-binary. So I would allow you to kind of unpack that for me.
Yeah, so in Western society at least, so in our country, in our society, we tend to think of gender to be on this binary spectrum of not even really a spectrum, just a binary. So you have man, woman, and that's it. Those are the only two options. However, gender really is more of a spectrum. So it's non-binary. There are not just two options.
Okay.
You have man, woman, and then everything that doesn't fit into just man and woman is considered non-binary. That's an umbrella term, and that includes a lot of different categorizations.
So how many genders are there?
You can't put a number on the number of genders because everyone uses different words to classify themselves.
I would disagree. That's where it changed my mind. I'm not convinced that anyone can just use any classification for themselves for their gender, and certainly not that then we have to compel.
Okay, now, just hear how it's going. He tried to make an argument, hey, that these things are not the common things, so we don't want to change everything by the things that are uncommon. Okay, understand that. Now, clearly, it's not going to change your mind. Just understand, it's not going to change your mind. That's not going to change your mind. And now she's going to the idea that, hey, sex and gender are different. There's no set number of gender. It can be anything. He says, I disagree. Change my mind. Okay, well, what's going to change his mind? What's going to change her mind? Is anyone's mind going to be changed in this? Now again, this is being dealt with from a non-Christian perspective. So I would argue from a non-Christian perspective, what are they basing any of their arguments on, right? Because again, if let's say the scientific world deems that sex and gender are completely different, let's just say that's the majority where science takes us, because you got all the medical articles coming out saying that there's a difference between the two. Let's say that's where they go. And then you're like, so you can't argue it from a scientific perspective if all of science disagrees with you, right? So then what's going to be your basis? In other words, if you reject Christianity, well, what's going to be your basis in making the argument? Right? What's going to be your basis? And her argument is, hey, this is the way society should work, not based off any Christian morality. She's just going to be like, this is the way it should work because, well, she says that's the way it should work. And so it's going to be really, like, as I'm listening to this, I already know it's going to become very frustrating because they're all going to be making dogmatic assertions that everyone's supposed to basically live according to. And basically, in other words, it's their own religion, their own religious dogma with their own priest, and you must follow. And if you don't, you are an apostate. You are anathema. But it's all deemed by what? Who gets to determine why it's this way? And really, we're entering into a time where everyone's going to do what is right in their own eyes. We've been there before in human history. We're there now. I think we've always been there at some level. And the church has to figure out, how do we address this? As you're listening to this, you're probably thinking, man, I would say this to her and I would say this to her. But let's just remember, you know what this person needs more than anything? She doesn't need her mind changed about her view in regards to sex and gender. Obviously, she needs salvation first and foremost. And then we would hope that through salvation, getting to the scriptures, that would possibly lead to a different perspective on some of these things. But let's just see where this goes. They're just going to go back and forth. And at some point, I just kind of throw up my hands. I'm like, I don't think, what does this accomplish? And this is how all these arguments seem to go. There's sex and gender is different. No, sex and gender are the same. No, they're different. No, they're the same. No, they're different. No, they're the same. No, they're different. No, they're the same. Okay, thank you for arguing. Let's all move on. And it's like, well, so how does Christians enter into this discussion that because we've got to be able to come at it from we can't come at it from a conservative versus a liberal perspective. We have to try to figure out how to do this biblically. That's what I'm trying to get you to think about. That's what I'm trying to get you to focus on. It's so easy to get caught because you can get into this argument based just off the way you were raised, the way it is in your culture, just your personal feelings. But we have to go, okay, as a Christian, what do we want for these people that we disagree with? We want salvation, right? That's what we want, right? We just don't want to win an argument. And it's so easy. I've done it so many times as someone who was on the high school debate team, went to the state championship for debate. I can still debate all day. I can go all day with debates. I know how to set up, there's all the techniques you can use, manipulate, use questions to set the person up because you're leading them to the answer you want. And then once they get the answer, then you pounce on them and say, gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. And I understand that. And look, In my flesh, I can debate, love to argue. And I love to argue with anyone, right? Like if I walk up and there's someone who has a position that I completely agree with, I used to do this at work all the time. Some people caught on just because the way my brain works. I like to engage in like meaningful conversations. So I would just look for anyone. Oh, what are they saying? Oh, they're saying something I completely agree with. And I would just immediately pretend to be on the other side just to argue, just to debate, just because I wanted to do so. I would provoke an argument just so that I could debate because it was fun to debate. And sadly, it was fun to kind of manipulate people, saying this and saying that just to get a reaction. Not godly, not Christian, not justifying how I've acted in the past. I'm just being honest with you. But I can argue any side. If someone walks into my house and they're pro, LGBTQ, there's 9 million genders, I'm going to argue the other side. If someone walks in my house and says sex and gender are the same thing, I will argue the other side just because typically what I feel is whatever side a person is on, I think they're always, they tend to go to one extreme and sometimes I like to argue the other side to try to pull them back to the middle. But the point is that as a Christian, debating can't always be the answer because debate is about winning. And we're about ministering. I'm trying to draw that distinction between debating and ministering. Ministering sometimes may involve argument and debate. There's no question about it. Ministry can involve rebuke and condemnation. No question about it. But the goal is different. The goal is ministering to people for salvation, not to win, not so that you can go back to church. Because I used to see this when our church in Nebraska went door to door, I think Thursday nights. It's always funny. It's always the men that would come back and always have these stories. Oh, I knocked on the door and the person got mad and they said this and I said that. And it was almost like bragging that they got into an argument with someone at the door. And I was like, are we just there to build up our own ego that we're being persecuted and people argued with us and look at how stupid they were? It felt like we were just telling stories and not broken over the fact that the person didn't hear the gospel. And you've probably heard people do the exact same thing. So, all right, let's jump back into this because we're already at an hour. So, as always, we go longer than I planned. But let's hear this conversation out.
Society to address them this way, right? I'm sure you can understand that the compelling of language is an issue.
So, what gender do you think you are?
Well, I'm a male.
Okay, well, I think you're a woman.
No, legally I'm a male.
Oh,
it says on my driver's license that I'm a male.
Okay, so that's your sex.
No, I'm also a male.
Sex. It's your sex.
It says on my carrier certificate that I'm a male. Gender. Some legal documentation say gender.
What if I say I don't believe you?
It doesn't matter.
Exactly. It doesn't matter if you don't believe me.
No, it doesn't matter because biologically...
What gender do you think I am?
I would assume you're female.
Yeah, see, you're making assumptions.
Yes.
I identify as non-binary.
I don't... Respectfully, it doesn't matter.
It does matter.
Now,
actually.
Let me ask you this. What would you say if I have...
It matters what pronouns you use for me. It matters how I'm socialized in society. It matters my gender expression. It matters the way that I'm allowed to express myself. It matters what bathroom I use. It matters who I'm allowed to live with. It affects every aspect of my life. So you saying...
What pronoun should I use?
You should use they, them pronouns. So you saying that you don't believe me...
What if I don't?
If you don't, I would consider that disrespectful, and that's actually an act of violence to misgender a trans person.
It's an act of violence.
That is an act of violence to intentionally misgender someone, yes.
Here we come to the issue, and this...
Now, they're just talking past each other. There's so many issues being thrown out. Okay, if she disagrees, she's like, what if I disagree that you're a male? Okay, so if you disagree that I'm a male, you're misgendering me. I think I'm a male. If you don't think I'm a male, then you're misgendering. Like, I don't know what her point was there. And he's like, it doesn't matter because I'm a male. He should have said, well, okay, so what if you do? What if you don't think I'm a male? What does that mean? Does that mean that I'm not a male? Like, so what was she? I think what she was trying to say is that you get to decide if you're a male. I don't get to decide if you're a male. I guess that's what she was trying to say. To me, that's where he should have explored a little bit more, but he just wanted, no, I'm a male because I've got a driver's license that says I'm a male. And of course she goes back to, that's your sex. That's not your gender. And then he tries to argue that there's some legal documents that use the word gender. Currently, I have a feeling by the end of 2021, they will no longer say that. It's going to say sex, not gender. And it may ask what your gender is, and then you can say, I think what I've seen some things say, I've seen some documents now say gender, and it has male, female, or non-binary, or binary, non-binary. It'll give you multiple choices. That's where we're going. And so to argue that you're a male because your driver license says you're a male, I don't know what point he was trying to make. But this is just, these conversations start disintegrating so fast, and you're just like, so what point is anyone trying to make here? But let's continue. All right.
This is why I'm out here. You just said that's an act of violence. That means it's an actionable offense. That means it's a crime. So you believe that for me...
I didn't say it's a crime. I said it's an act of violence.
An act of
There's
violence.
a lot of things that are not considered crimes that are acts of violence.
Okay, so you believe it's a non-aggressive act of violence.
I think that, okay, when you misgender someone, if you were to misgender a trans woman...
Yes.
Trans women, especially trans women of color, have the highest rate of murder within the LGBT community, right? So if you were to intentionally misgender a trans woman, that could put her at risk of murder. You understand that? Because people think because you're trans...
I don't understand.
I think that really does show that you're privileged in the situation then.
Yes, I believe we're both...
I think you're extremely privileged in the situation that you don't have to experience that, or that you don't have to worry about that, or consider that you don't feel like you need to respect people's pronouns.
I'm considering this and I'm asking you questions. Mm-hmm. You said these are the pronouns I need to use. Yeah. I said, what if I don't? You said that's an act of violence.
Yeah, I would consider that an act of violence against me.
Okay, so that's a crime. An act of violence against you is a crime.
I would consider that. So I would consider you being disrespecting me as a person. And that's not okay, and that's not even ethical. It doesn't matter if it's legal, it's not ethical. And I don't know how you can do something that's considered unethical.
I don't know how you can not allow me to speak and ask questions based on your own premises. Please, we're trying to keep this civil. I haven't yelled at you. I haven't accused you of anything. You're getting very heated. You said...
Now, someone just said, I don't know if there is an argument to be made against the transgender movement if they don't believe in a creator. Absolutely. If they don't believe in a creator, and they believe basically they are going to define what is if they don't believe in a creator, they're defining their own morality. They're defining right and wrong. So that's why that's where I think having the argument misses the point. We've got to get them to, let's talk about God. Let's talk about the scriptures. We've got to just present the truth, the scripture to them. Winning this argument or even engaging this in argument. I think what we're hearing here is you're just seeing he's talking, she's trying to talk, and you're like, nobody's listening. I don't think the way I would handle the conversation is I'm not going to debate you over this because there's no point in debating. We're operating from two different worldviews. My worldview is there is a God and he is the creator. He determines how things are. And that's the way we operate. Well, until I can get them to believe in the creator, submit to him, follow him, then all I'm arguing is for them to try to accept the worldview that comes from a creator without a creator, which never works. It never works. It's like getting a young person to accept Christianity because you're the parent and you make them accept Christianity, and they accept Christianity because that's what their family does, but they never accepted Christ. Well, guess what? It's only temporary, and usually they grow up and become resentful and bitter and upset of all the damage it supposedly did to them growing up because they basically believe Christianity was forced upon them. You gave them Christianity, but they didn't get Christ. If you give everyone in the world a Christian worldview without Christ, without God, then it's only temporary at best, and it usually leads to a complete full-blown rebellion and tossing it completely out. So, I think I agree that these conversations are very difficult, and I'm going to say this: I've gone through this so many different ways. I've talked to young people and find myself arguing about it, and then afterwards I'll be like, man, I was handling that like a debate. I was handling like that. I was on the debate team, and if you were watching, you may be like, man, he won the debate, but what did I win? See, there's lots of videos like that on YouTube. Ben Shapiro, a lot of people on a college campus, and they'll have some liberal kid comes up, and then boom, Ben Shapiro destroys college kid, and everybody, and those videos get like 25 million views, and we love that. Look what he did. He destroyed that liberal snowflake. And I'm like, there's nothing Christian about that. Destroying them so that we can go brag that we're smarter and that we beat them in an argument isn't ministering to people. That's what I'm trying to get. I hope I'm getting that point across. And I agree. These conversations, I don't know exactly okay, how do we go back? Her worldview is very dogmatic. Sex and gender are two different things. Sex is your biology. There is no set number of genders. Anyone can identify any way they want, and because they can identify any way they want, I have to go along with their preferred pronouns. They, them. I can't remember all the different ways to do the pronouns. It's crazy trying to figure it all out. But if I don't do that, according to them, I'm misgendering them, and I committed an act of violence against them. Now, she seems to be pushing back that she doesn't want to say it's a crime, but an act of violence to me. Basically, I've committed some kind of assault, and I've put that person's life in danger, that they're more likely to be killed. That's where we're at. So how do we communicate with that? Man, we can argue with this all day. For the longest, people would say, well, the medical world, the science world is on our side. I just think the science world, the medical world seems to be moving away from our side. So then we're not going to be, how are you going? My argument would be predicated on the fact that I believe God created man in his image, and he created them male and female. And that I believe that my identity should coincide with my biology and gender. And the reason I believe it should coincide is because if it doesn't, I have to go to extreme lengths to do things to my body that are completely not natural. I've got to suppress hormones that are there, or introduce chemicals or hormones into my body that were not presently there. I've got to do surgical, doing this to my body and this to my body. That shows that clearly I'm trying to make my body go with how I feel, and that seems damaging and detrimental, and I don't believe biblical. But I'm coming at it from a biblical perspective. Well, I can argue that biblical perspective, but I'm not going to convince them unless they first accept the Creator and the Scriptures. And I guess I think we have to have I think it's perfectly okay to do this. Look, listen to them. I think here's what I would say. We need to listen. We need to hear their story. We need to hear their feelings. We need to hear their heart. We need to show love and compassion. But at some point, we have to say, listen, I hear where you're coming from. I hear your emotion. I hear your story. I hear all that you've been through. And I want you to know that I love you. I want to show compassion to you. But I'm going to at least share with you my perspective. And my perspective comes from the fact that I accept the Scriptures, and this is what I believe the Scriptures teach, that there is a God, that we are sinners. Salvation is only found in Jesus Christ, and by accepting him, I'm accepting that I did not create myself, but I was created by God, and this is the way he created us. I believe that your life has value, there is sacredness to your life, there's sanctity to your life, and I call you to put your faith in Jesus Christ. We obviously disagree on this, but I want you to know that I love you. I believe God has shown his love for the world by sending his only begotten Son, and that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. I would try to put my focus on that more than anything else. But these conversations they're just going to go. We're going to finish this, but you tell me how you think this conversation goes. What some people do is like, oh, he won. No, he won. No, she won. And it's like, no, as Christians, I'm not in about winning arguments. I'm about trying to minister to people. I say that, please note, I don't always do that. Look, I have been so guilty of not handling myself the correct way either. I am not coming at this like I'm morally superior because, man, my flesh gets involved and I can start debating all day long. But I've learned that that's not the Christian way.
That's an act of violence. Mm-hmm. That's a crime. Okay.
I didn't say that was a crime. You're
An
putting
act of
words in my
you said
mouth.
an
I never
act
said
of
that was a
violence
crime.
against you is a crime. So
I did not say that.
You said it is an act of violence against you.
I said it's an act of violence, and I said misgendering anyone's an act of violence.
Yes, you said it is an act of violence against that person. That is, in fact, a crime. So here's my question. Since we've now decided we don't know the number of genders, it's a spectrum. It exists. There is no set number. You've asserted the premise that we are required to use the pronouns that are preferred by the individual. We have no idea how many pronouns there are. We can never know how many pronouns there are. And to not use a proper pronoun
You could ask.
is an act of violence against them. Did you ask my pronouns before you sat down?
No, I didn't ask your pronouns because
Why?
I haven't referred to you with pronouns.
You didn't ask my pronouns, though. You just said you can ask.
Yeah, you can ask. What are your pronouns?
But you didn't ask.
What are your pronouns?
You just talked about me being privileged. You understand? No one goes around asking pronouns before they speak with people.
I asked you
and so
how
to
you
ask of a
identify yourself.
restructuring of society
I did ask you how you
based on
identify
a number
yourself.
that's
Did I
not tangible with gender versus sex is something that is incredibly corrosive.
Did I not ask you how you identify yourself?
No, I don't believe so.
Yes, I did. I did actually. You said you identify as male, and that would.
After the conversation, sure. Okay, well, let's say that. Sure. So we need to ask pronouns before every person.
yeah.
And if we don't use those
If you don't-
pronouns,
yeah.
how many pronouns are there?
It's the same kind of thing. There aren't like a
Sorry, would
limited
you
number
just
of
so
pronouns.
people can see the sign? Would it be okay if you just step aside for just a second
There's not
we
a
also have a
limited
camera
number of
going.
pronouns.
Thank you very much. There's no limited number of pronouns.
No, I would
But if
say
someone-
the typical ones are she, her, hers, him, his, her, his.
Okay.
Sorry, him, he, him, his, and they, them, theirs. Those are the typical number of pronouns. We usually use 3.
Okay. So I just want to, again, the goal is here to change my, I'm open to new ideas.
Yeah.
There's no set,
kind of space around that.
Yeah.
different kind of space around us. I think, no one's being a,
And what's going on is got someone, and this always happens on the college campuses. Steven Crowder comes in, he's doing this. People willingly sit down and talk, and then someone comes up and basically like, you're being aggressive and you're a hate crime. And because everybody wants to silence everybody, which is just ridiculous. This is a conversation. Now, I don't think the conversation is really that beneficial at this point. So now we're arguing about you have to ask your pronouns, don't ask your pronoun. I don't even know what his point is. His point is, and so whenever he seems not to be making a point, then he reverts back to, you're here to change my mind. Well, okay, well then what point is he making? Still don't know what point he's tried to make. His argument is, I disagree. And her argument is, I disagree. Okay. We get a difference of opinion. Do we have any source of truth that could we rely to other than our own opinions? Now, she could pull up the World Health Organization. She could pull up medical journals to argue that sex and gender are 2 different things and that gender is not binary. She can pull that up. Now, he could try to go find an article to contradict that, but I think the predominance of the research is leaning her way and not his way. So you see, now you're just this to me is how the argument goes without Christianity. Christianity would come in and go, okay, I'm going to offer my perspective. Just make sure you understand my perspective is predicated on the fact that there is a God. He is creator, and what he says is what is true. That's the Christian worldview that is radically different. You throw that out, as someone pointed out, to me, it's just a never-ending circle of opinions. And what's weird is everyone thinks their opinion is dogmatic and right and almost a religious dogma. And if you don't follow it, well, you commit an act of violence, as she said. It's just really frustrating to listen to. They're going to get into this thing about society, which is really bizarre. And she misses his point. I think he makes a good point. She misses the point, but to me, this just demonstrates again how these arguments go without Christianity, because now it becomes a societal argument. This argument, well, you'll hear. We'll break it down here in a minute.
accosted here. We're just having a conversation.
Oh, no, there's no question of accosting. We're just trying to bring the conversation so that it's not like a kind of like a separate stage spectacle kind of deal. So we're all in conversation around, and we can engage with your sign. And
sure, I appreciate it. But it's not though. It's a conversation between two willing participants right now, and I will
with
go.
Other people talking as well, though.
I'm not. I don't consent. So.
So this is your setup, and we're supposed to just follow your rules. And this.
Yes, when one is invited and we've gotten the proper permissions, and I've said.
Open campus, a college campus.
Sure, it's an open campus.
We can actually do whatever we want.
You can do whatever you want. You can protest, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to be engaging in conversation with the crowd.
Necessarily have to be my rules.
What's your name?
No, that's not incorrect.
I'm a student
But I would love to continue my conversation here. So when we talk about gender and sex, right? This is a very new idea. You said in Western society.
It's not a new idea.
Really?
No, it's not a
So
new idea.
when did gender theory start? When did gender and sex become separate?
Well, they're actually, it's not necessarily the idea of gender theory. It's the idea that there have been different genders outside of man-woman for centuries.
Okay, how so?
Yeah. India.
India.
In
Sure.
India, they have third gender. Native American cultures, they have third genders.
Sure.
In ancient Egypt, they had third genders.
Okay.
So it's a very Western idea to say that there are only two genders and that this whole thing is a new idea changing our
Well,
culture,
you know what else
changing
is a
our
very
society.
Western idea? So it seems to me your presupposition there, correct me if I'm wrong, is that because other cultures have done this, there's a precedent.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think that
Well,
we're
you do-
hermetically sealed in any way.
So you do realize, and you talked about how very different it was from Western culture. So antithetical to Western culture, you named India, ancient Egypt. You know what else? We also believe in that's antithetical to those cultures. We're against slavery.
Why?
So just-
I'm sorry. I'm really confused as to why you brought slavery into the discussion about gender.
I would love to bring it up.
Yeah, that's
See, I don't know how she missed the point. I don't know how she doesn't get it. But see, this is what happens is nobody's listening. She completely misses the point. His point is very profound. His point is, okay, your presupposition is that this idea that there's only two genders is a very Western construct. But if we look at other societies, they don't believe that. So he's like, okay, so because other societies don't believe that, then we should adopt it because not all other societies. So he's like, if we go with that mentality, well, there are other societies who believe slavery is okay. So why does our society believe? And she's like, I don't know why you brought up slavery. You missed the point. It's not about slavery. It's about you making an argument that the reason we should not accept that there's just two genders is because other societies do not. Well, then other societies determine what is right and what is wrong. Other societies to determine what reality is. So this becomes an argument that society determines what is right. Now, look, let's take this to its logical conclusion. Okay, that's a great argument. Society determines what's right and what's wrong. If society determines that there's only one gender, then that's what we would go with. So society gets to determine if there's two genders, three genders, four genders. So then we just let society make that determination. Well, then how far do you take that? So society can determine any. So once society becomes the way of determining right and wrong, then you can't look back at the society of the past that owned slaves and say that society was wrong because society accepted that. If she's going to make an argument that we should embrace more than two genders because other societies do so, then you can make the argument, well, other societies offer up all kinds of crazy ideas. Should we bring those into our society? But she's missing the point. She used for her standard that other societies said there was more than two genders. Therefore, we can go along with more than two genders. Society is now becoming the moral standard or the standard of reality. And he's arguing, well, by that argument, other societies also supported these things. So why don't we support those things as well? I don't know how she's missing that point, but she's like, why are you bringing up slavery? Like she's completely missed the point, but this is what happens. Now the argument's going to determine what society determines. So society now becomes the way we determine this. Steven Crowder doesn't have a better argument. He's going to reject. Other societies said this. He rejects what other societies say. Okay, well, then what is Steven Crowder using as his argument for how many genders are there? What is he going to utilize? She's using society. He says, well, I reject what those societies say. Okay, but why? What if our society deems it the way it is, then that's the way it is, right? Like, and I agree with the comment someone just left that conservatives can't believe that their beliefs are no longer what most people believe. Now, I think that there's I think that's a very good point. At times, we're going to have to realize society no longer accepts our belief system. And we're going to be in the minority. But from Christians, we don't care if it's the minority or the majority because we don't change. We just realize that what they need is Christianity. That's the only way it's going to fix it, not arguing. But let's see where this societal argument goes, right? I'm trying to speak quickly because we're already been on an hour and 23 minutes. So yeah, this is what always happens to me. All right, here we go.
My point is, because your premise is because it's found in other societies, therefore it's okay, or it is to be good. My point is there are plenty of other practices. Well, I'm trying to get to why I believe it's harmful, and you're explaining why you don't. But the point is, if something was practiced in another society, and it was harmful in another society, and we agree that it's harmful, for example, we both agree that slavery was harmful. We both agree that maybe cannibalism is harmful. You can find these practices in societies. My point is, it's not a valid argument to simply say it's been found in other societies if that practice is harmful. So it comes down to the idea of, is it productive or harmful for us to separate the idea of sex and gender?
Other on a form, like you said, the ramifications for that in legal.
So that's the question.
Yeah,
so other societies have done harmful things. I think we can agree that doesn't necessarily mean that it's.
I'm sorry. I
okay.
don't think respecting someone's identity makes that harmful. I don't understand. I don't agree with you comparing gender identity to cannibalism or slavery. That seems pretty offensive.
I know. It seems you think a lot of what I've said is offensive.
Yeah.
You've been set up here from the get-go for it to be offensive, and I'm not trying to offend. Let me re-explain what it is. Take any practice, okay? Take the practice of neck stretching, for example, which is not harmful, okay?
It is harmful, actually.
Okay, well, some people don't think it's harmful. They don't think it's harmful in these societies. Take any practice that's relatively benign that we believe to be harmful that they don't believe to be harmful. The point is, just because another society at one point has practiced it doesn't make it correct. Can we agree on that?
I'm sorry, I think you're making really false comparisons.
No, I'm not.
I do. I think you're making false comparisons.
Can we agree? Because listen, there are also many societies the other way, right, who've only ever recognized two genders, two sexes.
But that doesn't mean
That's
that
most.
these other genders don't exist.
That's most. So you're implying that those societies were wrong.
I'm implying that they have their other societal standards.
Right.
Societal standards are based off of a lot of things. It's very intersectional what we decide to accept in society. So if you're going to say, well, because you're
society can be wrong.
making the same argument. Yeah, society can be wrong.
Exactly.
Society was wrong about gay marriage.
Sure.
I think people are wrong saying that, gay marriage, being gay is unnatural and being gay is a crime.
Okay.
That's society being wrong. But you know what? We adapt to modern times, and I think that we need to.
But you just compared us to
adapt.
ancient Egypt and India as though that was a valid argument for convincing me why they have more.
This isn't an ancient practice. This is still going on.
Sure.
In other countries, this is still going on.
But you just said it's not fair to use other societal comparisons.
I'm
because
saying
we adapt.
It's not fair to compare
You're the one
gender
who did
to
it.
slavery.
No. I'm trying to get to the premise of the argument. I'm trying to get to the premise. I'm trying to get to the premise of your argument here, okay?
The premise
and I'm
of
trying
my
to keep this as very
argument.
respectful as possible. You said this has been practiced in other societies for a long time.
Yeah.
My point is that's not an argument because there have been horrible things, maybe benign things, maybe semi-harmful things in other societies. We would both agree on that. So it's not a valid argument.
To bring slavery back, though.
No one is arguing to bring slavery back.
Exactly. So why are you?
Well, actually, they are. Of course, it still exists in other countries in the Middle East and some countries that you've mentioned.
Like I said, I don't think you're making a fair comparison. I think you're
I'm making a very fair comparison.
I think you're kind of just going on a tangent in order.
You see? I mean, can anybody stop and listen? Ma'am, lady, whatever pronoun you want me to call you, listen, you made an argument that in other societies they have more than two genders, so that means we can. Okay, well, other societies do all these other crazy things, so that we should, no, we can't do that. And then she goes and says that other societies are wrong. Who gets to determine if a society is wrong or right? If society gets determined wrong and right, then the society who says homosexuality is wrong, that society would be right because that society made that determination. So does society determine wrong and right, or do you determine wrong and right? Who gets to determine it? See, this is what listening to people who reject Christianity or not using a Christian worldview, this is what it sounds like. Society gets to determine it. No. Society can be wrong. Okay, well, who gets to? So if society can be wrong, then society doesn't determine how many genders. So then who decides? The individual? Well, if you believe there's 50 genders and I believe there's 2, then I'm right and you're right and you can't say that I'm wrong. And if you believe that you get to determine it, well, then you can't tell society that they're wrong because then society is made up of individuals who determined it. This is maddening. This drives me crazy. Look, if there is no standard, then there is no way to define what is right and what is wrong. She used society, and then she turned around and said society can be wrong. Society is wrong when society disagrees with her, and society is right when society agrees with. So society is wrong when it disagrees with her, and society is right when it agrees with her. So guess who's the ultimate judge? She is. And yet, if I disagree with her, I can commit an act of violence. So she determines what's right, and I'm bound to go with her definition of right because she, I guess, is God, and I must submit to her. Do you see exactly this is where society has gone? And you know how we got there? We threw out the idea of absolute truth. No creator, no God, no truth. The individual becomes God. Everyone does what is right in their own eyes. But then here's the problem. Everyone does what is right in their own eyes, and then they determine that that's right and wrong for everyone else. This is fascinating to listen to, but it's maddening to listen to. And Christians, this is the world we're walking into. This is the world we're walking into. So really the argument here, ma'am, or whatever pronoun she wants, and I'm not saying that to be facetious, but whatever pronoun she wants to be called, and I don't even care. I would call her whatever pronoun she wants. You want to be called them, they, us, whatever. I'll call you whatever pronoun you were because there's no point in trying to argue with that. I would just say, here's the difference between you and I. You determine what's wrong and right. You determine how many genders there are. You determine what reality is. And I believe that I don't determine any of that God does. That's the difference. And we can argue all day. Unless you accept God, you're not God, but you think you are. Because again, listen to the way the argument went. Other societies say there's more than two genders. Okay, so then that means there's more than two genders, right? So, but these other societies do all of these other evil things. Yeah, but those things are wrong. All right, so then does society determine it right or wrong? Well, no, societies can be wrong. Okay, well, if societies can be wrong, why did you point to other societies to prove your argument? Because you get to decide which society is right and which society is wrong. On what basis? Your own basis. So really, you are the one making a determination, but you want to impose your determination on me and I have to live according to your morality. It's insane. It's crazy. But Steven Crowder doesn't have a better argument. He wants to argue, well, other societies have been wrong, so he doesn't want to base it on society. So what does he want to base it on? Let's see if he comes up with a basis for his argument.
My point is, it's not an argument.
It is an argument. I think it's an argument.
Okay, so I will use your
argument that our Western standards are not necessarily the pinnacle of what we should be doing. Western societal standards do not mean that we all need to be following the same thing because we're not all Western and we don't all follow those beliefs. So if a Native American person...
Of course you do if it's the law. We all have to follow the law.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, the law is different. I think the law is different than a societal standard. So legally...
Well, hold on a second. How is the law different? It is the societal standard legally.
Legally, yeah.
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 Let's stay within those parameters.
Okay, sure. So there's other countries that are considered Western that would recognize a third gender.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So why not?
So how many genders are there? It comes back to if we're going to change this.
After Crowder made negative statements about Fox News.
So we are sitting here talking about gender.
Yeah. So if I were as a person,
this is a modern theory in the United States, right? Sex and gender were interchangeable. No, I'm going to finish one sentence here. Okay. I would appreciate that. You've been very privileged in speaking over me. I'm not convinced, right? The job here is for you to sit down and change my mind, and I think that's very productive for you to do with other people on campus. Right? I don't think this is a way to change somebody's mind.
I don't think you want your mind changed.
I have had my mind changed.
You want your mind
well,
changed.
instead of assuming that, how about actively trying to change it? So my point is, you've mentioned that it's non-binary, but you haven't given me a number of genders and how we restructure society. You've merely pointed out that it's an act of violence to use an improper pronoun. See, I think that would have, you just talked about a societal standard. If the societal standard is using the wrong pronoun is an act of violence against somebody, I think that's an incredibly dangerous societal standard, and it's one that nobody can uphold consistently. Would we not agree?
Right. I mean intentionally using the wrong gender. I mean when you know someone's pronouns, you intentionally use the wrong pronouns because you don't agree with them or you don't recognize their identity to be real, that's an act of violence because that's purposely disrespecting someone. No one wants to be purposefully disrespected.
I believe me, I understand.
If I called you the wrong name all the time, how would you feel?
I would feel very disrespected if
Exactly.
you, for example, came in bombastically and other people interrupting. I'd feel very disrespected.
Hey, can she develop that active violence thing? Like, where does that take us? If someone uses the offensive pronoun, it's
Yeah,
active
so
violence.
it's intentionally using the wrong pronoun. So if you ask someone their pronouns, or they would correct you and say, no, sorry, these are my correct pronouns, and you continue to disrespect them, you have to understand how much that puts a trans person at risk.
Yeah.
So does that person go to get arrested for using the wrong pronoun, or like it's an act of violence?
Act of violence, I know that you like to say that an act of violence means that it's legally a crime.
It is.
That's not how I'm defining an act of violence.
It doesn't matter how you define an act of violence. This is the
well,
thing. We have to have legal
It doesn't matter
definition.
how you define an act of violence.
No, it
then,
matters
I'm
how the
sorry.
law defines the act of violence.
I don't think it does.
You don't think it matters how the law defines an act of violence?
I do. I'm saying that an act of violence does not have to mean that it's a crime. I'm saying that it's
an act of violence against another person, an unwilling participant, is in fact a crime legally. There's no way around that. Can we agree on that?
How about
Can we agree on that? Let's find some common ground. Can we agree an act of violence against somebody else is a crime and no one should commit it?
I'm saying no one should commit it. I'm not going to say that it's necessarily illegal.
Okay, but it is illegal.
Criminal defense.
I'll allow you to assume what you want, but it is illegal.
Can I finish my earlier thought then?
I would like you to finish your earlier thought, but I think this is a very central point to the argument because this is one of the first things that you've said.
Yeah.
And we haven't found common ground. We don't agree on that. I do find that the idea of...
Yeah, no, can I hear what she has to say?
Questions, and she wants to take my question. So since this is an equal setup,
Yeah.
so
No, I appreciate. Well, you can sit down afterwards and we'll have a conversation. No, listen. I would like to have a conversation with one person, and then you can all line up and have a one-on-one conversation. But I do. I don't consent. So I'll have a one-on-one conversation.
Allow her to have the microphone, so that it's not just you shoving the microphone in her face.
I'm not shoving a microphone in her face. I'm simply holding
This
it.
is what you're doing. So let her have the microphone.
But you just said this is not an equal setup. I've paid for this microphone. This is my microphone. So would you like to have her take your place?
I would like to finish my thought that you haven't let me finish yet, actually.
Okay. Do we have a time code? Do we have a time code? I believe it's been about over 30 minutes, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I would like to finish my thought because it actually hasn't been over 30 minutes. It's been less than 30 minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
So my thought is that you talk about legal ramifications. How many genders are there? Okay, so when you have countries that recognize third genders or non-binary gender options, you know how they put that on their form? Non-binary, other,
Yeah.
third gender.
Right.
How is that complicated?
Well, can I tell you how it's problematic?
How is that problematic?
It's problematic because you have people who've been sued, arrested, or put out of business for unknowingly using the improper pronouns, and that's the point that I'm making. There's been you're referring to a societal standard. What can be filled out on a form? Yeah. That's your premise. I'm saying there's been a societal standard, one that's biologically based, for millennia, which we've now changed, and we're punishing people who don't agree. So you may think it's disrespectful for someone to not use the pronouns that you demand. I think it's equally disrespectful to demand that somebody live in a spectrum that hasn't been agreed to, and they don't even understand.
What businesses have been put out? Who's been put out of business for not using the right pronouns?
Oh, in the UK, this happens all the time. In Canada, Bill
can
C-16.
you name a specific business?
Yeah, and Bill C-16 in Canada is really important. For example, we have comedians who've been put before human rights tribunals
So
for
Canada
using improper
recognizes
pronouns.
a third gender, though.
Canada does.
Legally recognizes
Yes.
a third gender. So
Yeah.
the law is their legal standard. That's their societal standard, right? So the people who aren't agreeing with that aren't agreeing with their societal standard.
Right, but it's a societal standard that flies in the face of biology.
But
and
it's
my
a
issue is,
societal standard that's legal.
So do you believe that people should be put before human rights tribunals for using the improper... Gender is biology. It was until 1948. You know that, right?
No, I don't agree with you on that. I'm sorry.
Okay, but when did gender theory start?
I don't know the year gender theory started. I'm sorry, I'm not a human encyclopedia.
Okay. It was 1948, Simone de Beauvoir and Judith Butler. These are people. By the way, when he started it, there were still only two genders. Gender was a grammatical issue, usually used to refer to as a noun. I'm French-Canadian, so in French we have masculine and feminine.
Right.
It really is a very new concept and one that is not rooted in any kind of biological precedent to say that there are unlimited genders. That's the issue. And so when you are jailing people and punishing people for not adhering to an entirely new system that you yourself that you haven't defined, I do think that that's a problem. I think saying that somebody using improper pronouns is an act of violence against someone, I just disagree. I think that's a real problem, and I would hate to see
it's not disrespectful?
I think it's disrespectful to force somebody to use pronouns that are being invented by the day.
If I told they're not being invented by the day, I don't know where you're getting that information.
How many genders are there? How many pronouns are there?
I can't define the number of genders or the number of pronouns.
Exactly,
I'm sorry,
because anyone can determine them. They are being invented by the day.
Yeah.
New genders each day.
So if I told you that I identified as, if I said, hey, I want you to use just my name, not my pronouns.
Sure.
Does that make you uncomfortable?
No.
Right. That wasn't hard, was it?
No, it wasn't hard.
Yeah, exactly. That's what people are asking you to do.
No.
Yeah.
You know, as a matter of fact, you have a TA. We just had her on the program yesterday, on Monday, who got in trouble for using the student's name because a student demanded that he use masculine pronouns even though she was a girl. And he said, "Listen, I'm not comfortable with that. I will use her
if it's
name."
Masculine pronouns, I believe that person would be using masculine pronouns, and you just misgendered them.
He used her name.
Yeah, you used the name.
You said her.
He used the name.
You just said her.
Yes. Yeah, I did because she's a female.
That's not how that works. I think
that is how that works.
So we established.
That is how that works.
You agreed with me previously that we established previously gender and sex are totally different.
No, I don't agree.
How do you know that person's a female?
I know that because of biology, and here's the thing: gender theory.
Did you look at them? Did you happen to just examine them and decide that person's a female because of what you saw? Is there external genitalia?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you genuinely feel that I've been interrupting you more than me? You keep saying you're not able to finish a thought. I haven't finished a phrase.
I think you just finished a phrase.
Okay, do we want to score points or do we want to be... I think you've been interrupting me quite a bit. And you just assumed a premise that I don't agree with. No, that's my point that I've not been able to make is gender theory, as you're describing it, is very new. It started with Simone de Beauvoir in 1948, and what you're discussing is the idea that actually came with Judith Butler. The first time there was this idea that there were more than two genders was John Money. I'm sure you're familiar with that case. That's very new. And there's no biological backing behind this theory. It is based on an emotive response. So I don't agree that gender and sex are separate. Legal documentation sometimes don't say they're separate. We're trying to adapt that now based on how people feel. And I don't think that we should adapt the law considering something an act of violence because someone uses a pronoun which is biologically correct because you consider it an act of violence against you.
What's a biological pronoun?
He, her, his, her.
How do we determine that?
Whether they're male or female.
Yeah, but how do we determine that's... What if we decided that she, her, hers was what we were going to use for males?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We right now,
we have
male and
right
female,
now, so that's
his or her.
Current standard, right?
No, it's a biological standard.
The words that we use are based off of what we as a society use, though.
Not
right?
entirely.
Yeah,
no, they're a reflection.
Linguistics is pretty societally based.
Okay.
I would say.
Amphibian.
What about amphibians?
Is that societally based?
Amphibian.
An amphibian is I don't. You know what? I'm not a science major, but I will say an amphibian is a scientific classification of an
reptile.
Animal. Yeah, it's a classification of an animal species.
Bush, tree, blueberry.
Yeah. Okay.
Are these societal terms? The point is that language is a reflection of standards that we have as a society. Are doctors sexist?
I think some doctors are sexist.
Are doctors transphobic if they refer to their patients who have a penis and they come in for a prostate exam as a male? Is that doctor hate speaking? Is that an act of aggression?
I think if that doctor misgenders their patient, then yeah, they are being transphobic.
Okay. Well, my mind has not changed, but I think I tried to find some common ground. I'm sorry that we didn't.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry that you feel that way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madison.
I'm not going to shake your hand.
I figured.
Well, there you have it. What do you make of that other than that? This is the maddening kind of conversations people are having. And look, everyone who finds themselves in these conversations, I agree. You don't really know what to do. You don't really know how to exactly handle that. You see how maddening that got? So even if someone's a biological male, and I refer to them as a male, then that's misgendering them because I don't assume that they're a male, even though biologically, how do you know they're a male? Well, they look like a male. So now I can't even draw the conclusion that a person is a male. I can't refer to them as a he because he looks like a he. I have to stop and say, I don't know who you are, but could you tell me your pronoun so I know how to address you since I don't know your name? Could you tell me your name and your preferred pronoun? Because if I use the wrong pronoun, I'm misgendering you. You see how crazy it has gotten. Now, when you walk into that world and you want to communicate with them and minister to them, you see how insane it is. Now, look, I agree that some of this stuff is just hard for me to wrap my mind around. It really is. It's hard to wrap my mind that there is your sex based off biology, your actual genetic makeup, your chromosomes, but then you can be something other than that. And then we all have to go along with you. And if we don't go along with you, we're bad. We're evil. We need to be silenced. We need to be censored. We've committed an act of violence. That is very hard to wrap your mind in. How are we going to function as a society. But that's where the society is moving at a fast rate of speed. Remember, where he was talking about where these things entered in, he was talking about 1948. We're all the way in 2021. Okay, so even to go back, you're going all the way back to then. But please note, everyone there was arguing over societal norms. Crowder even started going to societal norms. Society has normally viewed gender and lines with biology. But if society changes that, then does Stephen Crowder then go along with society? And according to her, if society rejects her, is she going to go along with society? Well, guess what? She's not going to go along with society because she doesn't like it, and Crowder's not going to go along with society because he doesn't like it. So then if society doesn't determine right and wrong, you're left with individuals determining right and wrong. This is the classic philosophical problem of abandoning God. Then everyone does what is right in their own eyes. It's where you end up. But it's maddening to hear these conversations. I think Christians, we can offer at least, look, you can ask me how to handle this. I don't know. I've said this before, and I know a lot of Christians get mad at me. Look, if I'm talking to someone, I'll put it this way. I won't go into great detail, but I know someone who's transgender, was a female, has transitioned to a male, looks like a male, has a beard, looks like a male. I got no problem referring to it as him. I don't make a big deal out of it. He, him, whatever. Refer to him by their name. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me because the issue is not getting into some argument about what that person needs. They need Christ. Now, this person claims to be a believer. This person goes to church, actually does different ministry things at their church. So they believe in God. I pray and hope and encourage that they'll continue to read their Bible, study their Bible, and these issues will have to be dealt with. But simply I'm not going to refer you to by your male name and your male pronouns. I don't know what I'm accomplishing doing that. Now, some people say what you're trying to accomplish is trying to force them to face reality. But they're not going to see the reality. They're going to see it as hateful, arrogant, bigoted. They're not going to see that I'm trying to help them. If I felt that it would help them see reality, I would be more than willing to do that. But I want to just show love, friendship, compassion. They come over to my house. They're over at my house. I think they're going to be at my house tomorrow for my birthday. I don't have an issue. I don't care. I'm going to be friendly. They've called me and talked to me about scripture. They've talked about theology books. But I hope and pray that something would change. But just by being, look, it would only take a couple of times going, I'm not going to refer to you by your male name and I'm not going to refer to you by your male pronoun. It would only take and then I would no longer have any relationship with the person. They just would not come over and they would not talk to me. So what did I gain from that? What did I hope to gain from that? Now they know that I have a strong disagreement with a lot of their issues. They know they don't like my theology, but they're still willing to engage in conversations sometimes of a theological nature, even though they disagree. So I just think that we have to, and someone, I think someone posted a comment making that, sometimes we just try to win points. We just try to win, and we don't gain anything from that. I just think when you listen, I don't know how many people you've spoken to in regards to these issues. If you speak to any young person on a college campus today, you're going to hear some of what we just heard. And you're going to feel at times, at times you feel like you're losing your mind. You're like, wait a minute, wait. Okay, wait. So let me make sure I understand this. Okay. So there's an unlimited number of genders. I've got to figure out the pronouns. And remember, and even Stephen Crowder, she accused him of misgendering someone because he referred to someone as a he. So you can't just assume anyone's a he. You can't assume anyone's a female. You got to figure out how they identify, and it doesn't have to be at all consistent with their biology. That's where society is going. We have to figure out how we communicate with people. I got no problem saying, hey, so what pronoun would you prefer? Okay, I'm going to use your pronoun. I'm going to show respect. I'm going to show love to you. But I am going to look for every opportunity to present the fact that there is a God. He is the creator. He created us male and female. And that by going against that biological reality, to me, seems not only unnatural, painful, but damaging to yourself. forget society to yourself. And out of love for you, I would like to talk to you about this. And when you have the ability to do so, but just being a jerk, to be a jerk, just to be demeaning. Again, I saw this in with the homosexuals early on when I became a Christian. It's just referring to them as derogatory terms, trying to talk like them. It was just, there was nothing loving about it. There was nothing compassionate about it. And I think in many cases we just pushed them away, and they just viewed Christianity as being hateful. Now, I got no problem if they view me hateful because I believe their lifestyle is a sin. But I always try to explain, I believe your lifestyle is a sin, but you know who others' lifestyle I believe is sinful? Mine. I'm a sinner. You're a sinner. Your sin is drastically different than my sin. I don't understand your sin. Never had a problem with your sin. Never been tempted to engage in your sin, just as you've probably never been struggled with my sin. But we're both sinners. We're in the same boat. And the solution is Jesus Christ. That is how we should approach it. But I've saw too many Christians who just wanted to be rude and just be jerks and call people names. And it's like, there's nothing Christian about that. So we've got to have this. We've got to try to be balanced here. And I just wanted to at least introduce the subject. I know I'm not giving you a lot of answers, but what I want you to see is that's where we're headed. We're headed to a new world. And we're going to have to figure out how we're going to deal with this. And yes, there's going to be some very difficult consequences. I mean, again, Amazon just removed a book because they didn't like what it said about transgenderism. You can't even, and in many cases, you can't even engage in a meaningful conversation. You're just going to be shut down as hate speech. And that could ultimately have a very negative impact on Christian podcasters, churches. It could. And we're going to have to be prepared for that. But let them come after us for using clear biblical teaching, not just because we're being jerks and we're saying mean, cruel things simply to score points. Let them not hate us for that. Let them hate us for being righteous, not for being condescending jerks who just want to hurt people. We don't want to hurt anyone. We've got to see the dignity of these people, even though we disagree, even though we don't understand. We got to still see that they are created in the image of God. We got to see they have an eternal soul. We got to see they're created in the image of God. We got to see beyond our difference. We got to see beyond our disagreement. We got to see beyond something that maybe we cannot understand. Maybe it even disturbs you and disgusts you. You've got to see beyond that to see the human inside there, that there's a human being created in the image of God who has an eternal soul. And it's difficult sometimes not to just allow our ideology to be the way we see. We don't see the person from an ideological perspective. We see the humanity of the person. And we all tend to forget that, including me. All right, I'll stop right there. Feel free to add all of your comments by emailing me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. Yeah, this one is going to prove to be very controversial, I bet. Everyone's going to be ticked off at me on every side, which that's probably going to prove that I did something right. When you got people on the left mad at you, people on the right mad at you, non-Christians mad at you, Christians mad at you, that's probably mean then I struck a nerve, because usually the truth is somewhere in the middle of all of the extremes. So hopefully I helped someone. God bless.